Sudden Impact takes the Dirty Harry franchise into the 1980s, and the titular character out of the city for a gritty, small-town revenge plot. Also, Harry's new partner is a dog, named Meathead. Welcome everyone to the Collector's Cut. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
Go ahead, make my day.
Joe, I was genuinely curious if you're going to pick that, which is by far the famous line from this movie, or if you were just going to say swell, because he says swell a lot in this one.
Yeah, I feel like he always has a word, because I commented last movie that I thought the word was going to be marvelous, and I was like, that's too short. It's too much of nothing.
Yeah. Honestly, one of the weirdest things about watching this franchise for the first time back in like high school when I first saw it is that I couldn't believe that the second most famous, because the first famous speech is obviously the first movie, did I fire 5 shots of 6? I've lost count. Do you feel lucky, punk? I'd always assumed before that, because I'd always also heard "Go ahead, make my day." I thought, oh, that must also be in Dirty Harry, and I was shocked that it wasn't in the first movie. And I was even more surprised when I didn't even hear it until the fourth movie, which is what we're going to talk about today, which is Sudden Impact.
Honestly, just to follow up on that, I completely forgot it was even a Dirty Harry line.
Oh, yeah.
I thought for sure, I was like, as soon as it didn't show up in the first one, I'm like, oh, it's just Clint Eastwood in one of the other times he's a cop in the 70s. But no, turns out he's a cop in the 80s.
Yeah, we'll get into all this stuff. So yeah, premise of Collector's Cut is that we work through franchises or batches of movies that are associated by a theme. Could be an actor, director, whatever. Obviously, this is the Dirty Harry franchise. This is the fourth movie in the Dirty Harry franchise. It is Sudden Impact, which came out in 1983, which is about, 6 years after the last movie?
6 or 7, yeah. They took a long break in between the trilogy to the tetralogy.
What's interesting about that is I think, first of all, I noticed a bigger gap in the age for Eastwood in this. As soon as he showed up, I'm like, oh yeah, you're a man in your mid-50s now versus your mid-40s.
The first time he shows up in this movie, he's wearing what I can only describe as the stereotypical like grandpa sunglasses. And I was like, oh no, someone let him out of the home.
Do you know what's so funny though is I had that thought, oh, he looks older here, and then I went, it's been 30 plus years since this movie came out, and he's still kicking and making movies. Because he's in his 90s now. He's an old dude.
I genuinely, he made some sort of pact with the devil somewhere through. So
I mean, power to him that he's still going strong at this age. But he, his birthday's 1930. So he's easy to work out his age. He's 53 when this came out. Which is not really a critique, because unlike today where you've got like 70-year-old Sylvester Stallone still being Rambo and it just feels a bit silly and he can barely run, or Harrison Ford running around as various characters, at least 53 is still a working age. Like, he'd still be working this job at that age. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's just like sort of noticing the jump from the last movie. It's like, oh, he's aged a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there was just a noticeable jump in everything with this movie. We moved away from everything that was 70s and just jumped right into 80s.
Oh, yeah, even the music over the opening, because the opening is like it's actually very similar to the last movie, because the opening to the last movie for the titles was a helicopter shot of San Francisco. This was kind of the same thing, the only difference being it was now nighttime. It
was nighttime and there was synth playing instead of jazzy sax.
It was still quite jazzy, though, but it was like an 80s jazzy. It was it still had that kind of funkiness to it, but it was more of an 80s funk. It had the
drum machine and the keyboards and stuff instead of just straight saxophone trumpet.
Yeah, so we definitely shifted to a new style. I'd say visually it's got a different style, although funnily enough I wouldn't say it's got an 80s visual style. I would say that this is actually just a different style of 70s movie, but it does feel different to the last couple for sure.
Yeah, it definitely, there was a lot of stuff that reminded me of, and I know this is in itself 2000s, but a lot of stuff that reminded me of Kill Bill, which of course was reaching back to like those 70s sort of things.
I think what I was getting from it, and this is partly from the plot as well, which we'll get into later, is it kind of felt like, because Eastwood directed this is the first one of the franchise that he's directed. It kind of felt like he'd watched a few Brian De Palma films and wanted to do a Brian De Palma-esque plot and style, and I was getting that from a lot of this. Which
I mean, when I say Kill Bill, it's really only one thing specifically, and then just the general tone of revenge plot.
we got revenge plot. So the plot is a bit different. I mean, I guess that, if I get some positives up front, is that I would say compared to the Enforcer, this one is definitely, because one of the big complaints about the Enforcer was that it felt like the villains were an afterthought and it was barely focusing on it. I would say that here, regardless of what the quality of the writing is or what we're going to say about the villains, and it does feel like it's the focus of the movie. Like the focus of the villain and the murders, it feels like it's sticking to that story. It does have some random Harry things happening occasionally, but it does feel like that's the main point of the movie, and it's always focusing on that. So that's a positive compared to the last one. For sure.
This really is the villains movie with Harry just occasionally intersecting with them. There's like maybe 3 or 4 scenes I could really point to throughout the whole thing that are like, and Harry directly influenced this plot point.
Yeah,
whereas everything else is just the villains and the revenge seeker.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting. It does make it feel very different. It almost feels like Harry walked out. It's particularly because most of the plot is set outside San Francisco. He goes to San Paulo at some point. And I actually checked the moment in the runtime where that decision's made, because it was much further in than I was expecting. It was 45 minutes into the 2-hour movie. So I'll talk about pacing, because obviously we talked about pacing a lot in the last movie. Here it's the complete opposite. Here it's bloated and there's tons of things I'd cut out. It's the complete opposite of the last one. But it is like Harry walks out of his own franchise at the 45-minute mark and walks into some other person's franchise with, it just sort of spends the rest of the movie there. It's a little weird in that sense.
I mean, as soon as you make that transition to like the small town, it immediately just takes on a completely different tone in like everything that was going on. And I feel like to some extent it was intentional the whole way through, but at the same time I don't know. I feel like it was more so out of, hey, it's like really hard to film in busy San Francisco, so maybe let's just put it over there.
Yeah, maybe it was an economic choice. I'd like to think it was made out of like, the last 2 movies, progressively have felt worse because they're trying to just copy the stuff in the first movie. Maybe this was maybe a conscious attempt to like, let's do something different. Let's make it feel a little different. Let's do.
Yeah, and I mean, if they were going for it being different, they got it. It's just a question, as we will cover, whether or not it worked.
That's a different question, but at least there's an attempt to do some things differently.
Yeah.
Which, so those are the positives. It does try to shake up the formula to an extent, and it does at least focus on what its plot is and feels like it has a plot as opposed to the last movie, which is a good thing. Now, does that necessarily mean that these things that it does are good? That's another question. We'll get into it. Obviously, we're going to start spoiler free here. We're not going to talk about any late spoilers or anything until we give you the warning, so don't worry about that. Yeah, I guess it's time to ask the question. David, what did you think of Sudden Impact?
What did I think? I think that I enjoy the plot. I enjoy the overarching ideas they have. What this really felt like to me, to make a bit of a stretch of a comparison, but what it felt like to me is when you've gone past, I don't know, 2 seasons, 3 seasons in like a TV show. You've finished that initial plot that the showrunners had in mind when they started doing it. And so then they bring it back, but they move in a direction of like, oh, here's a new location and a new character, and we're just taking this brand new leap. It doesn't feel connected to any of the previous Dirty Harry films, which has always been an issue we've been having of them constantly ignoring previous films. But this one doesn't feel connected on like a base level. It feels that you've picked up this character of Harry Callahan out of the world that we knew in the first 3 movies and have completely put him into this totally separate world where everything's just slightly different. So do I like it? I'd say I like the attempts it made, and I like the plot itself. But do I like it in terms of being a Dirty Harry film? A little bit lesser so.
I I think objectively it is a better movie than The Enforcer.
Oh, that's not.
Yeah.
Objectively.
But I don't know if when we get to the end of this review, if my rating's going to be that much higher, because ultimately it is bloated. There is tons of things that feel redundant that I would cut out. While it starts off feeling like it's going to be a much more serious and dark movie, there's still like odd moments of like comedy like sprinkled in as well. Which we'll get to. There's just a lot of things that just feel like it's being bogged down, and I do think you could improve the pacing certainly, without even shooting or rewriting anything, just by like going into the editor's room and just cutting some chunks out. An example I would give is that a big thing that's set up in the movie, and we'll get into the specifics because we definitely want to talk about how this starts off, but Harry's like under like constant like assassination attempts because he's pissed off the mob, and there's this weird thing where there's an attempt made in his life, and like his superiors are like, you know what, while this is happening you should take some time off, and then eventually at the 45-minute mark they say, okay, you know what, since you're never going to take time off, how about I give you this assignment to go and research this murder because it's got connections to this smaller town, you know, elsewhere in California. Go there, where the heat's not on you, and you can go and investigate this crime. What boggles my mind about that is that happens after like a second assassination attempt that's unrelated to the first assassination attempt, and all I could think was, you could just completely cut the second one out. The second one is like isn't needed at all.
I as soon as that second one started, because here's the thing, they start by saying, hey, you need to take a break, and then he has an assassination attempt. He gets pulled into the office. They say, hey, we told you needed to take a break. And he said, I didn't even go out looking for that. And they said, okay. And right then they should have said, well, we're going to send you over to this other town. But instead they decided to do the entire first 15 pages again of you need to go on a break. He tries to take a break. It comes after him. And then they say, wow, you really can't take a break, can you?
Other than the one scene where he goes to the murder scene that's tied to the main plot, every single scene with Harry in the first 45 minutes is just random Harry stuff until he joins the main plot 45 minutes in.
Honestly, thinking about it now, I'm having to look down at my notes constantly here because I am genuinely having a hard time in those first 45 minutes separating in my mind what was Enforcer and what was this. Like, I'm like, yeah, like that scene in the beginning when he drove into the liquor store. I'm like, wait, no, that's not it.
That's Enforcer, yeah.
That's Enforcer.
Yeah.
So it's like, the entire first 45 minutes just this random collection of Harry Callahan just going about town, getting into trouble, and then, like you said, at the 45-minute mark, he's just put into a different place entirely.
Yeah.
And then the plot completely kickstarts from there.
And what's funny is that I kind of appreciate that when he does move to the small town, he's got a bit of a reputation, and the police captain, who happens to be played by Pat Hingle, who's Commissioner Gordon in the Tim Burton Batman movies, which is not something I want to think about, so, you know, maybe that put me off in the wrong foot right away.
Not even the first one?
Like, I can appreciate some stylistic elements, but I'm not a big fan of those interpretations of the character.
Fair enough.
And I hate Return. Like, I will happily take Forever and Batman and Robin over Returns any day of the week. Freaking hate that movie. Anyway, so
okay.
I'm not a Tim Burton fan, guys. Okay, that's just this. This is a taste thing. I just don't like Tim Burton. Anyway, so we do basically a very tropey thing here, which is the outsider cop who's not wanted by the local police department and constantly say, hey, you know, go home, get out, this is not your jurisdiction, go away, blah, 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 blah. Actually, the thing that made me think of a lot, and what's funny is that this was actually, I think, a year before this movie came out, is that obviously very different tone, very different character, but it was hard not to think a little bit about Beverly Hills Cop, with this kind of sentiment of, like, he's out of town, coming into this other place, and the locals don't want him there, but he's like, try to investigate the crime anyway, because he's Harry, you know, like there's all this going on, but I was getting a lot of that from like the vibes of like just him intermingling with the police department and the way the captain wanted nothing to do with him. There was that. So I mean, the movie kind of breaks down into like, you know, like there's the actual setup for the main plot that's separate from Harry in the first 45 minutes. There's all the Harry stuff in the first 45 minutes. And then you've got, okay, then the back half of the movie or so, which is actually Harry in the town investigating things and the plot that's playing out. I mean, I appreciate that they went this route where, without getting too specific for spoiler's sake, unlike there's a vicious killer that we're hunting because they're dangerous, we've got a revenge-style killer where, regardless of what the outcome might be by the end, it is a more sympathetic character to the audience, and there's the victims are the actual, awful people. That's kind of an interesting, different thing to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it fits perfectly. We've never really had a problem of the theme that the movie is going for is something that it seems like Harry should have to deal with based off of his first appearance. In his first appearance, it's laid down a very black and white view of this is right, this is wrong. And everything since that first movie is something that just tests that. It's something that pushes against, okay, but what about this situation? And having the victim of a crime get revenge for the crime is a perfect thing of, okay, Harry, is that all right?
Especially
that okay?
in the context of justice failed the victims here.
Right, exactly.
And so, I think that is very true that it does kind of fit Harry as a moral dilemma. I would say this one feels the least, though, out of the four so far. Maybe I shouldn't say four. I should not count the first, because the first one is the first one, and it just is what it is. But out of the sequels, I'd say that this one kind of feels like it's the least connected to it. And maybe it's because Harry himself is so disconnected from the plot until, the last 10 minutes, where he actually gets involved. Because there's a moment right at the very, very, very end where, he makes a choice, and it feels like, okay, this is coming back into Harry dealing with this dilemma. But he's so disconnected from the actual ongoing, or even being aware that maybe the person perpetrating this is someone he might want to sympathize with, that it never really feels like it's part of the movie until the very, very tail end. So at least the enforcer, for all its faults, immediately at the start, he's got a female partner, and how does Harry feel about that? Okay, it's at least it's baked into so many scenes in the movie that it feels like it's a constant question in the movie. So to give Enforcer a slight positive versus this one, this one feels like Harry's just doing a lot of fish out of water stuff, basically, in the small town.
I mean, it's not even really fish out of water stuff, because fish out of water stuff would imply he is trying to hail a cab, but the town doesn't have cabs because they're so small. It's just doing things where he's just trying to do his job, and literally everyone in the town just dislikes him being there.
Yes.
To add on real quick, there was one other scene in there where I felt like they danced with the theme, and that was the dinner scene. When they're sitting there talking, the person looking for revenge and Harry are basically just sitting there talking about.
Oh, okay. They're just having drinks. I was trying to what dinner scene? I don't remember a dinner scene.
Sorry, they're at a restaurant, but they just have drinks. Yeah. So it is just a moment of them talking basically about oh, well, I believe in this style of justice, and Harry's like, so do I. Wow.
Yeah. Although he does say unless it's breaking the law. There's kind of a line there. But Harry, you're kind of guilty of breaking the law left, right, and center yourself.
Literally, the first thing he does in this movie is a judge chewing him out for breaking the law. Which
I did think was funny, the opening scenes, him being late to court, and then the person he arrested gets let away because Harry arrested him with breaking, you didn't enter the premises with due cause.
Yeah. You didn't have probable cause. You came in, and none of that evidence is admissible. Mind you, quick note on that court scene, the judge would never say any of that. That's the prosecutor, and the judge would just say, agreed, and then slam the gavel.
But I do love the idea that this judge is again with you, Callahan. Every time you come out, one of your perps goes out of my court, I have to let them go. Even if I personally think they're guilty as shit, I can't do anything about it because you have broken all of the rules. Yeah. And this scene, it's a funny little introduction, but it's also something that I would cut because it really just exists to set up his second assassination attempt, which is completely redundant. So I would lose it.
I mean, I can't think of any decent way to have Harry enter the plot in this movie based off the scenes we were presented.
No.
At no point does he really come in and do anything big.
I guess you just start with them going for his coffee. We'll get into that scene in spoilers, but where he stumbles onto something happening. Would you believe it? There's a crime happening.
My gosh. And while there's something in his mouth as well, that's where they really faltered.
That's
in
it, though.
Enforcer.
We'll talk again. We'll talk about it more later, but I did laugh my ass off that as soon as he arrives in San Paulo, he literally drives into town for the first time and he hears an alarm in the distance and he's like, oh, my police work is needed. Oh, I'll have to do so. And he immediately gets involved in a robbery.
Like, I have to imagine that it's just like an aura that Harry has. Like, as soon as he was driving into town, everyone just went like full purge mode where they're like, oh, geez, crime.
Just so funny about it to me is that there's a couple of moments later in the movie where I think like his captain. I actually thought the captain from the last movie came back because the actor looks so similar. But I checked, it's not him. I thought it was Captain McKay from the last movie, but he's just a really similar looking guy with the same mustache. But I think he and both the police captain in San Paulo later on both say this something to the effect of, wherever you go, like, people tend to die or bad things happen. Right. And I'm like, usually that's a line in a movie that's like, oh, it's just the captain tune out. But like, at this point, 4 movies, like, no, they're right. Everywhere he goes, things are just happening.
When we're done with this franchise, I'm going to look up the body count that is directly related to Harry, because it has to be at least double digits.
Oh, easily. Absolutely easily. There's not even a doubt in my mind. Yeah, it's like, I appreciate the different tactics this one takes, but it does kind of feel like it's not really a Dirty Harry movie to a certain point, and I'm not sure. Maybe it's a small town. Maybe we didn't realize how much of San Francisco and like him being in the city was part of the Dirty Harry thing. I don't know.
I mean, for me personally, it just comes down to the lack of Harry, because a lot of the previous movies were following him around, just doing things like in blanking on the second one, Magnum Force. Yeah. In Magnum Force, like, we just had scenes of him walking around, like, taking shots with his gun, like, doing that. It furthered the plot. Don't get me wrong. It's not just character development scenes, but it was still following Harry during these scenes.
I guess it's kind of a weird thing. While this movie, I said, does feel like it's focusing on its plot, and it does make it feel like it's this, it's the central reason we're here. It's the point of the movie, which is what a plot should feel like. Maybe there's still a critique to be made that Harry himself feels disconnected from it, so he feels like he's less important in the movie, and he's kind of like, it's kind of more like a Western or even there's a movie I want to compare it. Oh yeah, like, kind of like how Mad Max Fury Road, like the whole idea of the like Mad Max movies after the first one is like, no, like Max kind of travels into a situation and ends up being this kind of wandering hero who helps him solve it. That's kind of more what this movie is versus the previous Dirty Harry movies.
And again, that's why I'm saying I like the plot. The actual story itself, I enjoy the mostly entire way through. Bloated it may be, but in terms of it being a Dirty Harry movie, it's more of a movie that happens to feature Dirty Harry.
I think you say there's a lack of Harry. I would dispute that and say that screen time wise there probably isn't. But I think let me finish this thought.
No, I know what you're saying. Yeah,
but it's telling that everything I would cut out of this movie are all Dirty Harry scenes.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lack of Harry tied to the plot.
Yes,
but there is quite a bit of Harry where he is just doing things, but absolutely none of it matters. And we'll get to it in spoilers, but I cannot think of a single possible reason that there is Meathead in this film.
Meathead's a dog, I think.
Meathead is his dog. He has a dog. He has a dog partner now. I don't get it. That's the part that as soon as that was introduced into the movie, I started to take a note of just like, there's a dog now. And I'm like, I feel like I'm not going to be able to forget that there's a dog. I feel like that's going to be a constant thing.
That felt very tonally different to the rest of the movie up until that point as well. But I think,
absolutely.
But all of this feels like a patchwork, or not patchwork. It feels like they realized when they're writing the movie, the plot's not really about Harry. We need more Harry. So they just came up with a lot of Harry things to interject the movie with. But all it does is hurt the pacing and feels tacked on to have enough of Harry to justify it being a Dirty Harry movie. It's kind of weird. I don't know, like, I don't think they would ever do this, but I almost wonder, like, would it be more ballsy to do like a twist thing where you release this movie called Sudden Impact, you don't tell anyone it's a Dirty Harry movie, You have it just be this, this character getting revenge, and he shows up halfway through.
He shows up at the 45-minute mark. Like, it's just,
Well, it wouldn't be 45 minutes if all his early scenes are cut. It would be much earlier. But
he shows up 2 minutes into the film.
But, you have maybe even less of him in the small town. Because even stuff in the small town, it's him walking the dog. It's him getting into random things. Even his investigation of the crime just feels like, he goes to talk to someone who doesn't want to talk to him, so he gets rough with him. Okay, that's the scene. There's a lot of that,
which ends up in yet another assassination attempt. Like, everything he does.
Everyone wants to kill Harry in this movie. There's at least 3 separate parties who try to assassinate Harry over the course of this movie, and only one of them is related to the main plot. Yeah,
and I would argue at this point, God himself is on that list.
So I think with all that said, we'll say spoilers then for Sudden Impact, so we can start talking about everything that's in the movie. I think we'll save the main plot, because I think we'll talk about all the early main plot stuff tied with the main plot in the back half of the movie. I think we just start with Harry's adventures for the first 45 minutes of Sudden Impact.
The short film of a man in his early 50s just driving around San Francisco looking for trouble.
I mean, the first scene we kind of already covered. There's not really much more to say about it. He's late for court. He does sort of like threaten the guy because the guy's acting kind of cocky in the elevator when they all leave.
Right.
He's like, I get off, Harry. Me. And there's not much to it. Yeah. The scene I want to talk about is, so Harry goes for his coffee. It's a small diner. It's a small diner. Yep. He walks in. He asks for his coffee, and he's looking at his paper. And you'll notice something's weird in this scene. The waitress at the diner is like she goes to pour sugar into his coffee, and she's just like standing there like pouring for like an absurd amount of time that no one notices.
I mean, everyone notices except for Harry.
Yeah. He's just she's pouring this absurd amount of sugar in, and everyone's just sort of sitting very quietly, and you get the feeling something's not quite right here. And he walks out and he takes a sip of his coffee, and he's like, "Ugh, what's going on here?" Because even if you like sugar in your coffee, this would be like ridiculous.
Yeah, this is just coffee flavored sugar at this point.
I'll be honest. At a certain point, I'm like, how much sugar do you have to pour before the coffee starts like overflowing the cup? Because there's just so much sugar.
They definitely passed that point. Yeah. Like, this was we cannot overstate how long it just held on cutting between reaction shots of watching this woman pour sugar.
We have to do like a Mythbusters like segment or something with just to get a cup of coffee, get the sugar, and just see.
I will gladly do that like right after this. I will time it. I will record it, and I will send it your way.
And match the time of the movie, like the pouring time. So get the movie up, and I can do it side by
exactly.
Anyway,
I will get the same size cup.
Well, we just had to know. So this is after we've recorded the show. We're just inserting this. David's got a cup ready. He's filled it with
a separate container of salt that matches the same flowing rate that it otherwise would.
Did you put coffee in or just water?
There's nothing. I just want to see if it's going to overflow at all.
Okay. So we're just seeing if even the cup can hold the.
Yep.
All right. Here we go. All right. Just hold it up a little bit.
I need you to time out 25 seconds, which is how long the scene lasted in the movie.
Yep, hon, I can do that. I'll just all right, I'm just going to count you in. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
All right. Here we go.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
It's pretty much what it was in the show or in the movie.
Yeah. I'm not even convinced there's going to be any salt left in that at the end.
I mean, if we run out of salt, then we're also going to call it, because this thing is like full.
15 seconds just passed.
Okay.
20 seconds.
Okay. It's almost at the top.
3, 2, 1, done.
Okay, so this is nearly empty, and this is like right at the brim. This is absolutely full.
I angle it a little bit just so they can see.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. So you can see the hump. There's that. Look at that.
That is absolutely full. There is no way that would have fit.
It turns around and like all the signs have switched to closed, right? Mm-hmm. So it turns out what's happening here is that there's actually like a gang of 4 guys who are robbing this diner. which, it doesn't seem like a particularly well-off diner. It's just a small diner. It's a bit of a weird target. I guess it's because they're small-time crooks and they don't want to do anything bigger. But what I don't, there's lots of parts here that I don't get. So she's doing this intentionally to tip off Harry that something's wrong, because he's been coming here for decades. He always gets just a plain black coffee. Which is why it's weird he doesn't look up when he's looking at his paper. I'm like, why do you think your coffee's taking so long to prepare? It's plain black coffee. Like, once she pours it, it's done.
Yeah. I mean, not to jump too far, but like as he comes back in and he sees this robbery's going on, because he was just coming back to complain about the coffee being wrong. He says like, "Oh, I always get a plain black coffee. Today I got a plain black coffee with sugar." I'm like, that's not a black coffee. As soon as you add the sugar, you've moved away from black coffee.
Also, it's not. You didn't get a spoonful of sugar. You got a C. Yeah. You got like Tony Montana's like cocaine supply levels of sugar in this thing.
I mean, okay, I don't want to stay on it, but yes. So he got a lot of sugar.
He got a lot of sugar. Anyway, so he comes up. So I'm like, as soon as the bad guys like jump up with their guns and they say something like, "Oh, you did great with that cop. Now give us the money." And I'm like, wait, what was the setup before Harry walked into this? Where, like, did she go, "Oh, like, Harry Callahan always comes in at 10 a.m. He's about to arrive," like, and like, well, we're just going to have to pretend that everything's okay then, and like, also, like,
I mean, yeah, that's the only thing I can think of that makes any sense. As of they started to hold up the place, and then the woman behind the counter says, like, "You guys picked the wrong time. Here comes that cop about to walk into the shop," and he's just like, "Thanks for the heads up. Nobody make a sound."
So yeah, Harry's like appears at the back entrance, and he just sort of stands there with his cup and gives the speech about the coffee, and then of course he pulls out his Magnum, and without any regard for any hostages or innocent people that might be in the scene, he just starts blasting. Dirty Harry. He is that Frank Klein from It's Always Sunny. So anyway, I started blasting.
Just start blasting. Yeah,
that is Harry in a nutshell. And there's so many moments where like innocent people are diving out the way of gunfire. I'm like, Harry, like if any of these people get shot, it's on you, because you just started firing. You didn't even,
Yeah, no, but like at the same point, he's stopping. Like the constant thing that he keeps on doing is like, I did it so something worse wouldn't happen.
No, like I get that, and I also get that he.
No, but I disagree with him. I get his point, but I'm like, no. But at a certain point, stop.
Well, no, this is the thing. See, if it was one guy with a gun, I would completely understand. Just if you know you can take the shot and hit him to save everyone else, I get it. But there's 4 armed people in this room. It's ridiculous. He's basically, whenever I'm bad at a video game, it's usually because I lose my patience and I walk in and just start blasting without actually being tactical. Yet Harry somehow gets away with it every time, where he's just quick enough with that damn Magnum that he takes out 3 of the guys quickly, and then there's a bit of a jumping or whatever, and then we get the famous line, "Go ahead, make my day."
He's talking to a hostage taker, and basically, I think Harry just lives off of the concept that nobody wants to shoot anyone else. They only use it as like a last resort. And so Harry's able to just be the one guy who genuinely does want to shoot other people. So he can just sit there, monologue at these people, and they won't take the time to shoot their hostage.
Yeah. Also, we do have to point out here, so he has this, it's not a big speech like the first movie, but he has his big line here, "Go ahead, make my day." Yes. I want to point out it's used the exact same way that is in the first movie, where he uses it here in this random event early on in the movie, and then he uses it again and actually takes the shot at the end of the movie with the main villain.
Yep. I would argue that the second time, though, doesn't make any sense for like the situation.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, they just wanted to do it to mirror the first movie. Yeah,
it was just them saying like, "No, this is a really good line. We need to keep using that."
Yeah. But so naturally he gets chewed out. Well, he got chewed out before this, actually, just for the court thing, because like, hey, this guy got away because you're a like a obscene detective who ruins everything with your tactics and just blunders head first into everything with force. And he has a line when he's leaving the diner where he's like, "Ask the commissioner if the coffee's psychic."
It was like the district attorney, and the district attorney was just being like, "God, you can't just go in because you think there's a crime going on. You're not psychic, Harry."
Yeah. Well, he's got a point. Someone give him a hint this time.
Yeah, fair enough.
he got it tipped off.
It was the coffee. The coffee is psychic.
And of course he gets chewed out for like all the gunfire and damage and just the amount of crap that goes on around him.
Yep. So yeah, he gets chewed out, and then immediately, like the very next scene, he decides, I'm gonna go cause some more trouble. And he goes to a mobster's wedding.
Well, to mirror the Godfather exactly, it's actually the mobster's niece who's getting married. Right. But yeah. And there's two like cops on a stakeout outside this hotel where the wedding's happening, and they see Harry go in and they go, "Oh no, we're on stakeout. Harry Callahan has just went into the perps area. What's going on?" So this scene is absurd as well, for numerous reasons. So obviously it's not random because Harry goes there, right? So that's fine, right? Harry's going there with intent. He walks in, he argues his way past the girl at the front. And he walks up to this mob boss who's one of these sort of B-movie actors that I've definitely seen in a few things of this time period. He's got a really gravelly voice, he's got a big mustache. And he's this mob boss. And Harry is there, and the guy's been doing that like sort of like, I'm a mob boss, I'm nice to everyone, sit down, have champagne, it's important, blah, blah, blah. And Harry is effectively there because this guy, seemingly, as we find out through the context of the conversation, has killed a prostitute. A prostitute that he maybe frequented and told some secrets to, and then murdered because she could tell people the secrets that he had told during pillow talk or whatever. And apparently had been tortured and found in like a car in the water with their feet burned off and something else. Like, Harry explains all this. Yeah. And everyone at the table, including the bride and the groom who are sitting there, right, are all feeling a bit awkward about it. But then he starts like describing that she's a prostitute, and then starts basically heavily insinuating that you did this, you tortured this, but she's not just dead, you tortured her. You went to a prostitute and you tortured her, and then killed her. And then his play here is that he whips out an envelope and says, little would this person, because he keeps doing it in sort of this third person, he never says you, he keeps saying, this person, little did he know that she wrote down all these secrets and gave them to the police. And now they're here and they're going to be unveiled to everyone, and all of the dirty laundry is going to come out. And the guy stands up and then starts having a heart attack, and he dies. He croaks right there and then. And I called what was about to happen. As he's walking out, he hands the envelope to like the concierge or whoever, and she pulls out the paper, and it's just blank pieces of paper. He did this bluff, and it's actually addressed, but he's been chewed out in the next scene for this. But again,
okay. All right, but like. Nothing. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my thoughts here. You were talking about the bloating issue before.
Yes.
This plot technically is the inciting, well, I should say, it should be the inciting incident that gets him to the other city.
Yes. That's right after this scene, they could send him away because they could say, oh, they're going to come after you. That said, though, I will accept one assassination attempt. I will accept one actual attempt to show there's danger and then send him away. So to be fair, this is technically needed. Maybe, I mean, it's stupid the way they've done it here, but
my only thing here is, out of all of that, why did the guy need to have a heart attack and die? Like, all he had to do was say, I've got this little thing of secrets and I keep it here in my coat pocket. That's all he needs to do. But for some reason, we needed to have the mob boss not only die as a direct action of Harry, but die as a indirect action of Harry as well.
Because what was funny is because part of me was going, like, did Harry like actually think this would be the outcome? And he says in the next, it's implied in the next scene, like the captain says, you give him a heart attack. I didn't know that would happen. It's like, okay, I'm glad you said that, Harry, because I was a little worried that this movie was trying to tell me that you were so good at what you do that you predicted that this guy would have a heart attack by making
Harry
this
just
threat.
Sees the sweat on his brow and the shake of his hand, and he's like, I can push this further.
Yeah, but I mean, I'll accept to some extent that he wanted to just ruffle his feathers to sort of see if he'd make a mistake. That's probably what his intention was, and the guy had a heart attack instead.
I think that's fair, but it also is for it's for a plot that like was introduced in that scene.
Yes,
like he tells us later, like, oh, the investigation was at a standstill. I was just trying to shake something up. Like, okay, but it's to go that far on this thing that didn't matter, like wasn't introduced before this, and is dropped immediately after this, it just seems so random of a scene.
Yes. It's a very random scene when he goes in there, because, like you say, it escalates to this big, dramatic, air quotes, point. It escalates too far in one scene to feel like it's earned what it's doing, and it just comes off as mildly funny that this is happening.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my biggest qualm with it is that I'm trying to follow this. I'm writing down notes of like, oh, this person does this person does that. I've got like 4 or 5 lines devoted to this scene, and none of it matters. Like all of it is just, it's just a scene that like the only reason that it was there was just so that we can have the assassination attempt so that he can get out of town. That's it.
Yeah. But at least this versus, say, the coffee diner scene actually has a purpose in the plot in some capacity.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta say, I am a bit disappointed that those scenes where he's eating something and stumbles into a crime didn't keep on escalating as we predicted they would.
I switched to coffee this time. Although, there is this, when he goes to the crime scene that's related to the main plot, which is, I think it's before this. Maybe it's after that. I don't know. Whenever it happened.
Yes, it is just it's just after that, yeah.
Yeah. The other cop that's there when he goes to see the crime scene is eating a hot dog, and Harry said something like, "How could you eat that hot dog?" And I went, "Harry, the first movie you were stuffing your face with a hot dog." But then he clarifies. And he says, "No one puts ketchup on a hot dog,"
which immediately made me not in line with Harry anymore.
Well, not only do I think that's an absurd statement, I don't think I've ever seen a photograph on like a menu, whether it be a fast food place, or the movie theater, whatever you're talking about. Every time I see a photo of a hot dog when they're trying to sell me a hot dog, you always see both the ketchup and the mustard in the alternating squiggles.
Yeah, the double helix.
Yes, the double helix. There you go. That's a much better word for it otherwise.
Yeah, no, I mean, as soon as he said that, I immediately was like, Harry, that's what made me honestly start to like make the joke that ended up being the plot of Harry's from some other world now. He's got some other thing going on. And I know that there are some purists out there. I know there's an entire like society for hot dogs and sausages that says that if you're over the age of like 12, you shouldn't be putting a ketchup on the hot dog. To them, I thumb my nose because screw them.
It's baffling. The only other thing I'll say about this hot dog, because I do have one more point to make, is that they intentionally had the guy eat a hot dog where the dog is far too long for the bun, so it looked especially phallic in the context of the scene when they were talking about getting someone getting shot in the dick. I don't know. I thought that was an odd choice.
Because he definitely mentioned it, and then the dog itself is stretching out like a full 3 inches from the end.
And like, which I would get it in like a light-hearted movie, but the tone of the victims and the murder stuff is actually quite serious. It's actually going for like a gritty thriller, which is fine because the first movie was a pretty gritty thriller. Yeah. But then everything that happens with the Harry and the characters feels completely at odds with that tone, which is
right
kind of odd.
After the hot dog scene is a weirdly introspective, like, why is Harry even still doing this conversation? Where they're just looking out at the bay, and then the guy with the hot dog's like, Harry, don't tell me it's getting to you. And he goes on this whole long spiel of like, oh, it gets to me every time. I'm always upset about murders and crime and all this stuff going on, but why do I keep doing it? I don't know. And then they just walk away. Yeah.
He said, I think one of the lines he actually says here is, the guy says, like, are you thinking about quitting? He's like, I don't know, maybe. And I'm like, you did quit. The end of the first movie, you son of a bitch.
You quit in the first movie. You should have been fired by the end of the second movie. In the third movie, you're given a life pass, so whatever.
Madness. Absolute madness. So obviously the other main things that happen with Harry in this first chunk is the assassination attempts. He's literally just walking down the street for the first one when a car pulls up and tries to hit him, and like 3 guys from the mob get out and chase him down. It's a whole big thing where they chase him up onto like a
pier, dock.
Yeah, dock. Yeah, kind of like a bridging dock bit. And they think he's hiding in a box, so they shoot it with a lot of ammunition, and then Harry just pops out from behind them and kills him without much effort. It's just really
except for one that manages to get away.
Yeah. So there's that. the second assassination attempt is the guys from the courtroom scene who want revenge on Harry. While Harry's driving, they pull up behind him and they light some Molotov cocktails. They got some bats and stuff. And I will, this scene should be cut. It is completely superfluous. I will say, just on a vacuum on its own, there was a really great visual at one point of like a stuntman driving like Harry's car, where the back seat is completely in flames, and it looked quite cool. It was a good stunt.
Yeah,
like I thought that was a stunt.
It was a cool stunt, but it also was like, okay, they're both driving down this road. Harry's back seat and front seat, mind you, because there were two cocktails, are both on fire, and Harry just keeps driving. I don't know what he's waiting for.
To be fair, the one in the front didn't actually smash, so it hadn't, because he picks it up and throws it back.
Okay. To be fair, his back seat is engulfed in flames.
No, he is. You're absolutely right.
So at certain, like, I feel like as soon as the first bottle was thrown into my car, the first thing I do is slam on the brakes and get out of the car.
Oh, yes.
But he decides to keep driving for like half a mile.
All these numerous times you've had Molotov cocktails thrown at your car.
It happens more than you think.
Where were you living before you moved? Detroit?
Inner city Baltimore. Why? But no, there is one scene that we skipped over here that I just want to real quick go over, is we are introduced to Horace.
Oh, yeah, yes, our returning actor who now is just Harry's friend. He's kind of the partner of the movie, because Harry doesn't actually have a partner in the movie.
Yep. And you know what happens to Harry's partners.
I know. He's only in two scenes. He's in the scene he's introduced, and then the scene he dies later on.
Yeah,
it was nice. Do you know, at this point when he showed up, I was like, "Yeah, it's him. It's Mustafa from the last movie. It's the pimp from the second movie. It's the guy who got the famous speech in the first movie." You know,
he's finally gotten all the way up there to recurring status.
Yeah, I will say I thought it was a bit silly that they tried to pretend he was there to assassinate Harry, even though it's believable someone would. Like.
Yeah,
they sort of do this thing where he gets out of his car and Harry's in the woods, like just like doing target practice, and the guy's walking up behind him holding a shotgun, and you're like, oh, even to the point where the actor's actually doing kind of a intimidating face as he's walking up to him, and then of course, but I knew it was going to be like Harry turns around and is like, oh, hey buddy, and in Harry's own way, This scene though exists to introduce Horace, so we can have Harry have a partner who's killed later. But also to introduce his new semi-automatic 44 Magnum, which, even though the first movie does make a big, his big speech that has him, 44 Magnum, the most powerful handgun in the world, blah, blah. There was something about the way he picked up this, like, semi-auto version and held it up that just felt like a commercial to me. They just...
no, he was literally reading off the specs. Yeah. Absolutely.
It just, but maybe the dialogue just wasn't written as well to like hide the fact that they're kind of pimping this gun out. But it just, I don't know.
Think he also specifically said the brand. I can't remember exactly, but I do think before it's just been the generic like 44 Magnum, but this time he was like, it's the Smith & Wesson 44.
Oh no, that was in the coffee scene because he said we're going to stop you, and he's like, who's we? He's like, Smith, Western, and myself.
There you go. Yep.
That was his thing. No, you're right. You had to bring that scene up. You're right. But yeah, the car Molotov that ends with like him throwing the Molotov into the other car, and then they drive off into the water, presumably all dead. I don't know if they say if they died, but
I have to assume yes, because at a certain point that car fills up with water.
Yeah,
and they're not getting out, and it doesn't seem like they were in too much of a hurry to get out in the first place. So.
And the scene the next day at this scene when they're pulling the car out of the water is when his captain or lieutenant finally says, Harry, this murder that happened with the dick shooting earlier, we've traced that back to San Paulo. You go there and take your time.
I do really want to give credit. Between his, I guess, lieutenant, the captain, and the commissioner, all three people who were chewing out Harry in the first time he was being attacked, the other two actors I felt were really wooden, and wooden acting is a problem all over this movie. But the captain, like this one guy who keeps showing up, he was the one that like really sold it. Like I really believed him as just this cop who has been through too much, and he's just like, Jesus, Harry, just give me a break.
Yeah.
Like I really want to give kudos on that acting. I don't know if it's particularly good, but it stands out a lot amongst the other actors.
Yeah, I think he was the lieutenant because I noticed that he kind of replaced the guy that was in the first and the third movie, the one who was kind of more on Harry's side.
Bresser.
Yeah, that guy.
Bresson.
It felt like he kind of replaced that role because he was the one who, to a point in the earlier scenes, was like trying to say, "Hey, come on, Harry." Like he was being nicer to him. He seemed to respect him more than the other two. But yeah, even he at this point in the movie is like, Harry, like everywhere you go, there's just chaos. So please leave. Please leave for a while. And like we said earlier, he literally drives into the main square of San Paulo. I have no idea how big this place. I've never heard of it. But, it sounds like it's just a coastal California town, presumably near San Francisco. But he pulls in. He hears an alarm. And sure enough, there's a guy running with like a bag of stuff that he stole. Is it jewels? Is it money? I don't know. Who cares? But he chases him down for quite a while, running down these streets, and then eventually the bad guy steals like a meter maid's like little motorbike and starts like running away on that. And Harry, the vehicle he chooses to commandeer is an old folks' homes bus. So he gets on the bus, he's driving for a second, then turns around and sees like just all these pensioners, and he's like, police officer in pursuit of a suspect, and immediately all the old people are like, yeah, get him, yeah, get that son of a bitch. And all I could think was, you're almost inadvertently like pointing out that Harry appeals to an older generation with this scene.
Pretty much. I mean, it definitely is. Real quick, I did look up San Paulo. It doesn't exist. Made up for the movie.
Made up. Okay, fair enough.
Yep.
Well, it felt believable enough as a coastal,
There's
California town.
There is a San Pablo, which has about 30,000 people. So
maybe it's based on that. Yeah,
maybe
because it felt small. The way he runs into his wife in real life, or I don't know if it's
Sondra Locke.
Sondra Locke, yeah. So she's the one going out for revenge. We'll talk about it more in a bit. But he runs into her like. At the end of this scene, I thought, the purpose of this scene is that the chase ends right outside where she's hanging out, and that's how they're going to meet. But then they never talk, and it's like, he didn't even know she was there. And then he runs into her again. In fact, he runs into her again 4 times.
He runs into her again, and at that point he has meathead. And honest to God, that scene baffled me.
Go on.
They're walking down a path. She's biking. Nobody's like jumping out or like changing direction suddenly. It is a long and narrow straightaway that anyone can see down. And somehow she gets surprised by the dog, falls off the bike, tells Harry to keep a leash on his dog. Again, the dog doing nothing. And then the scene just ends with them having now met.
Yeah, it's not like this is now they know each other, so it explains how they'll interact later. They just go their separate ways, and then they have to run into each other again later on. So they run into each other at least 3 times before they even exchange names and even have an idea that the other one's involved in their plot, if that makes sense. So very well. I did think the way she threw herself off the bike looked a bit like an actor throwing themselves off the bike rather than actually stumbling.
I mean, it would be one thing if like they got some B-roll footage of like the dog suddenly jerking to one direction or like jumping up at her, but like the dog, it's not a fit dog. This dog is barely able to walk, and it just stands there, and she's like, keep a leash on that thing. I'm like, lady, that dog is like 5 seconds from being dead. I have no idea what you want him to do with this hunk of flesh.
So at this point, now that Harry's in the town, and we've talked about the couple of random scenes early on with them, I guess now it's time to really sort of go back and talk about what the main story is. So early on, we're introduced to Jennifer. That's who Sondra Locke plays, who at this point had been in a relationship with Eastwood in real life since 75. They break up in 89. I only know that because I looked it up after because I was curious if they were still together when this movie came out.
They were just about to hit on the outs.
Yes. Well, they had... No, they had 6 years left after this.
All right, fair enough.
That's not too bad. Yeah, that's not too bad. So this is right in the middle. This is right when they're probably at their... Like, they're after the honeymoon phase, but they're still content with each other. They think they're probably going to be together forever at this point. So he says, "Hey, I'll cash in a movie where you get gang raped and get revenge on the bad guys."
See, you say that, but having like done little bits of acting myself, those are the best roles.
Oh yeah, that's the one that the actor's like, "Oh yes, I can be so dramatic and I can pour it all in." Yeah. So obviously we learn kind of the background of what the crime is as the movie goes on, but just to kind of make it clear here up front, because there's two flashback scenes. The second one especially felt kind of like redundant to me, because it's just there's a second scene where it's like, this is how the woman with the villains kind of like forced her or talked her into coming to this party. But what seems to have happened at the pier at this town, which is kind of, like that kind of,
it's like an amusement park
kind of fairground, like Cody Island. No. Is it Cody Island?
Yeah, Coney Island.
Island.
Right.
Coney Island, not Cody. Coney Island. Yeah. So it's like that sort of place where, right. So, and basically there's this group of people. I'm hesitant to even say gang. They're kind of just like a weird assortment of people who are together. But there's like a particularly vicious woman who's the leader of the group, who intentionally lured Jennifer to this party, who at the time was a college student, and even convinced her to bring her younger sister, Jennifer's younger sister, who at the time was, I think, a freshman or a sophomore in high school. So she's a teenager. And basically she invited them so that all of her friends could gang rape them, right? So you get this vicious sort of flashback scene of the incident, and it's a weird assortment of guys. There's the one guy who's clearly not really, like, is guilty about it and hesitant and doesn't want to do it, who the others kind of force into it. There's a couple people who are maybe a bit more, one guy who's maybe a bit more hesitant, but a lot more willing to go along with it. There's a couple of sort of just they're into it guys. And then there's the one who's kind of the deranged, like, lunatic who ends up being kind of the final boss at the end, who's the most vicious one of the bunch. But, it's this horrible thing. And our introduction to her is that she's making out with a guy in a car. Turns out he's one of the guys from this group. It's actually very I spit in your grave to an extent. This idea that she can go after them one by one and they don't even recognize her. They don't even like acknowledge that this is the person they attacked. And at least it's actually more believable here to an extent, because it's like 10 years have passed since the incident. But she takes out a gun. Wells T's like too busy feeling the euphoria of being touched, and shoots him in the dick, and then shoots him in the head right after. That's kind of her MO throughout the movie. She shoots in the dick and then the head to finish them off. So yeah, they investigate the crime scene, but we get that she's an artist. She's going back to Sao Paulo because that's where most of the other people are that committed the crime.
She goes and visits her sister first.
Yeah, her sister's in like a...
She's like catatonic. She's non-responsive, and she's like, "Hey, remember what happened to us? I killed one of them. I'm going to kill the rest of them."
Yeah,
hope that helps.
It's obviously, like, this is the weird thing about the movie, is that we're kind of laughing about how over the top and silly certain scenes are and how things don't quite track. But then you've got this ultra serious rape revenge plot in the other side of it, and not even just a rape revenge plot that left like the second victim like in a catatonic state that the sister feels especially determined to get revenge for. It's not just herself. So it's this ultra dark thing, and the villains that perpetrated this, because the first one we don't get to know before it happens, but after this we start to introduce to them a little bit, and we see, there's a scene where Harry goes to a bar and actually runs into the leader, what's her name, Ray.
Her name is Ray, yes.
Who is particularly unlikable, and she's also got this running thing where she's really into like various guys in the movie that don't want anything to do with her. She actually tries to hit on Harry and say, "Hey, you want to buy me a drink? You might get lucky," which almost felt like a reference to, do you feel lucky, punk? to me.
Yeah.
Like, a little on the nose. And Harry's like, "Nah, not today." And she keeps pushing it. And she's, even in this scene, like, she's not doing anything like villainous in this scene, but even in this scene, she's coming across very unlikable with how, like, sort of like, aggressive, absolutely. Maybe she's being with it.
She's very boisterous, very just like everyone else in the bar is just minding their own business, and she's literally going up to just random guys being like, "Hey, you want to buy me a drink? You want to take me home?" And they're just like, "Nope." And then they, rather than push the point, just leave. Like, they know not to deal with her antics pretty much.
The locals are clearly used to their bullshit and just get as far away as possible. Whereas Harry, he just sits there, and when she keeps pushing it, he says something like, I only sleep with humans or something like that. He says, he has a line like that, which makes her go to hit him, and he grabs her hand and then like pushes her away, or even like pushes her with his foot up the backside, and she ends up on the floor. So it's which, you know, not the last time he's going to hit this woman by the end of the movie. He punches her square in the face later on in the film. Hard to feel that sympathetic because she's a vile monster who, you know, traps people into rape situations.
I was gonna say, if you ever want a character to be okay with punching someone,
this woman's a fine candidate.
They probably shouldn't be. No, absolutely. I think sex trafficking is probably the best way to make it okay.
Yeah, so she's just this vile, and you sort of maybe start to think about the psychology. I don't think they put this much thought into it, to be fair, but the psychology of this, because later on, like the crazy one, the Mick, who's like the crazy one, who's got the really sleazy mustache, and he's the most vicious one. We see him being kind of rapey with like his girlfriend at one point.
I thought that was just a prostitute.
Or a prostitute, yeah, whoever it was, but he was being kind of aggressive with her, and he's clearly the one that everyone else is scared of, because one of the other guys like says something like that at one point. But he like is asleep later on in the movie when they're hiding out, and Ray wakes up and goes over and starts to like touch him and kiss him, and when he wakes up, he's like pushing her away, and she's like, come on, let's just do it, and he's like, no, bitch, and they start like swinging for each other, and I'm like, I almost get this impression that like her like feeling of rejection, that she's like fallen into this awful crowd and she's become the worst of them by trying to gain favor by like, you know, helping give them what they think she, you know, I almost feel like you could do like a character study on like how she became this way, and her feeling of insecurities is what led her to be this awful human being. But I don't think the movie's really thinking about it that hard, but I definitely think there's something there.
I mean, there is definitely some amount of thought put in that if they wanted her to just be, you know, as sleazy as the rest of them, then theoretically she wouldn't have any problem with just throwing all of them under the bus. Of just being like, hey, I'm not going to tell them that Jennifer's coming. I'm just going to let them die. But she does take the time to go to each one of them pretty much individually and say like, hey, remember that girl from before? Yeah. She's responsible for it.
Yeah, after the second murder, obviously, she starts to like, wait a minute, 2 of the group have died. So that's when she starts, I think with the rest of the group, it kind of feels like more about maybe building like a team because she's scared herself. But I would say specifically with Mick, it kind of feels a bit more like, no, she does like have some sort of like weird infatuation with them.
Yeah, which I don't like. I get that he's supposed to be some level of like charismatic, but because we're in the audience, all we see is the psycho smiles and the eyes widening.
He's definitely a bit over the top with the performance. It is kind of interesting because I would say that Ray, because I wouldn't refer to Jennifer as the villain. I kind of referred her to that in the spoiler-free section because we were kind of dancing around what was going on. I think she's an interesting case, but she's definitely not the villain. She's the killer, but she's not the villain. And I think Ray is the one who comes across as the ringleader. So I think for a lot of the movie, it felt like she was the villain, and I would have expected maybe the final conflict to be between Ray and Jennifer. But because Harry has to be in the final conflict, it does this interesting thing where it transitions to Mick at a certain point, about maybe 25 minutes before the end. And that's maybe not unsuccessful, but it does make it feel... It's almost like they try to shift to like someone like Scorpio in the last 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And obviously it's nowhere near as good.
I think that the easiest way this could have been solved was, like you said, there was that superfluous scene where they showed Jennifer being convinced to go to this party by Ray. And that's what really kind of laid it in on like, no, she is the one to blame. She is the central person who should be drawing Jennifer's like rage and revenge. As soon as you take away that scene, everyone's pretty much equal. It really could have gone any direction.
Yeah.
I think that one scene is the thing that really pushes the narrative of, no, Ray is the person to focus on. I think that if they wanted to change it to Mick, the easiest way to do so is show, because during the initial rape scene, like they show cuts of people's faces and stuff like that. They never really showed Mick being any worse than any of the other guys. I feel like all they would need to do is just show how he's even more violent than everyone
Yeah,
else.
I think you show either he's worse or you show that he started it
Yeah.
and escalated it, or you show maybe if you keep the scene where like Ray's telling Jennifer to come to the party and convincing her, even when she's hesitant. Maybe you show him walk out after and say like, "Oh, like."
Like he's the one coercing Ray.
Yeah, he's like made this request or I don't know, like whatever, but it does kind of feel like, oh, he's suddenly the main villain at the end, but I don't necessarily think he was, but I feel like it has to be just because the ending of the movie has to be Harry's the hero taking out the bad guy. If anything, I would have tried to make it feel more equal, because in the movie, Jennifer kills Ray before all the final climax stuff happens. It's kind of it's towards the end, but it's it's before the big final set pieces. I would have had it so that they were both still around and that both Harry and Jennifer could get their big moment kind of like almost simultaneously, and it would feel equal.
Yeah, I mean, not to jump ahead too much, but the entire last act pretty much just, I mean, not the last act, but as soon as Harry shows up, Jennifer's just reduced to damsel status.
Yeah,
She doesn't get anything to do.
Yeah. So it's that's kind of a problem. Obviously, we have the murders themselves. The second guy she kills is on the beach, just looking at porn or something like that.
Yeah, it's ever. I think that's the one thing in this movie that it did do a good job with, is that over the course of the movie, Mick notwithstanding, it gets less and less clear whether or not she should be able to kill this person. So the very first one was just the guy was literally like having sex with her again. And so she kills him. That's, cut and dry. Okay, he's not learned his lesson. Second guy is on the beach and he's like looking at porn apparently. Still sleazy, a little bit less so. Then they get to the third guy, and the third guy, he's like, hey, I was a kid back then. I've changed. I run a successful business. Like, I'm different now. Of course, it could have all just been lip service. He could have just been saying whatever to try to save his own life.
He did kind of sound like it kind of felt like someone in a modern sense, where you hear someone be accused of something from like their college days or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, should I really have to pay for something I did? I was just a kid." Which piss off. You're 18, 20 or whatever. Like,
oh yeah, no, and I mean, like, especially with certain levels of crimes as well.
Yeah. So like if anything, I ended up disliking him more because he was trying to like weasel out of it under this guise of I'm like a proper citizen now. I have a business. Like, if anything,
I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not saying that it doesn't make it more acceptable, but it is something where the previous two guys, still sleazy, still gross. From the perspective of like morality, this is a guy who at least has done something with his life since then. So it is it's a thing of, like you're saying, should you be punished for something that you did in the past? And if not, where's that line drawn?
Yeah. Like I say, I think it's maybe how you take it, but to me, he actually came off worse to an extent because he was trying to act like he didn't deserve any punishment. Right?
Yeah.
He was trying
sorry, he definitely wasn't innocent, for sure.
Yeah. So maybe it's the modern context of like a post, like Weinstein Me Too world where I'm just kind of like my view on this is very specific, but I ended up disliking him more as a character more than the first couple of guys.
I mean, they definitely didn't do anything to make him seem likable. Like, from an audience perspective, it definitely wasn't there.
Well, even earlier on when Ray goes to speak to him and says, are you afraid everyone will find out? He says there's nothing to find out. Even that little line's like, you, like, the fact that you could even say that is damning.
He doesn't show any guilt. He thinks that just time has absolved him, and that's definitely something worse. But then after him, the next one to die is Ray, and that one gets further down total pull because she didn't actually perform the act itself. She was the one who facilitated it, but she didn't perform the act. Of course, she's still guilty, immensely so, but it is still just that teasing of the question, because that's really what the movie is going for here, is like, all she is a vigilante at this point. She does not have the law backing her up. She doesn't have the authority even that Harry does as an officer.
I think
she is going back and just getting revenge. Does that still, if someone did not perform the act, but they facilitated it, does that still count as something that should be rewarded with the same penalty?
I think I might disagree a bit here on this, like it going down rather than up in terms of it being clear if they're guilty or not. Because I think everything you've been saying about Ray up until this point is that we felt that she was the main villain, right up until it switches.
I think that narratively she felt like the main villain and that she should have been like the last to be punished. But in terms of what her actual action was, I'm not sure that, like, I think that there is this theme because, I mean, not to bury the lead, but the last guy besides Mick was the son of the police captain of the town.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason the police captain has basically been telling Harry not to work this case, is because he's genuinely all right with this woman getting her revenge. And he's given her the green light, as long as by the time that she gets to his son, he's able to be there for it and is able to stop it from happening. Because he felt so much guilt and remorse and whatnot that he ended up trying to kill himself and ended up being basically catatonic.
It's the same as, well, I think it's intentionally the same as her sister. If you know, in essence, that the way he's sitting there, the way he's non-responsive is exactly like her sister. So this is the only one she, in some level, maybe doesn't forgive, but at the very least is like, you know what, you've already punished yourself. Like I don't need to do it.
Right.
I don't know if the movie's really asking you where that line is though. I don't know if the rest of the film, you're talking about, like, you know, each of these kills is progressively less clear if the person's deserving of the punishment. I don't know if the movie really is asking that. I don't know if I ever get that sense from it, that it's really...
I mean, I was because I knew the movie does not do a good job of hiding that the police captain's son is one of them.
Oh yeah, like, no, it's very clear early on. Yeah,
it forecasts that pretty early. So I knew that was going to be something that was going to have to be dealt with. And I think there was some comment earlier on. It was by Mick. He was basically saying, like, they were having a conversation about the police captain's son and basically saying how he just sits there and is a zombie all day. So I'm like, okay, he's not in a mental state where he's good. So with those two pieces together, I knew that probably the last person we got to, it turns out it was actually Mick, but I was thinking that the last person we got to was going to be somebody where it was a real struggle on Jennifer's part as to whether or not to kill him, on whether or not he deserves it. And once I knew that was the end game, I was then looking at everyone else through that lens of...
But it wasn't though, right? Like, there is no struggle. The only one she has a struggle with is the catatonic son. Everyone else, she's...
Yeah, no, she doesn't struggle with anyone else. I'm not saying that it's a struggle for her, but I'm saying I was viewing it through the lens of where is that line? Because they also had that discussion over drinks of where does it change from what Harry does to vigilantism?
Yeah, but I don't think the movie's distinguishing between any of the other characters. I think every other person she kills are all lumped together. They're all lumped together and they're
That's
over
fair.
the line because they were part of this incident. And that conversation's about, okay, just crossing that line into killing all of them versus, you know, a couple of them might be under the line, a couple of them might be... I don't think the movie's trying to separate them. I think it's just, at what point do you take the law into your hands for something awful that happened? And obviously, it's very in character for Harry. If I'm going to give the movie a compliment, is at the end of the movie when he makes the choice to cover for her so that it looks like Mick did all the killings and she gets to go scot-free. That feels like Harry would be such a goddamn hypocrite if he said, no, I have to take you in because you broke the law. Like, no. What she's doing now is effectively the same choice you made at the end of the first movie to go after the killer outside of being a cop, right? You know, you cannot judge her for this. So,
but see, I think that is moving off of the earlier thing, but I think that is why it is the central, at least what they were trying to go for with Harry's morals, is that Harry has said before that, like, the little things, drugs and prostitution and whatnot, he doesn't care. He'll let those people. As long as it doesn't get in the way of him prosecuting the big crimes, which I believe rape and murder would be those crimes. But that's the key there, is that these people that have been killed committed rape, and this person who killed them was the victim. So it comes down to, do you still think that it is a big crime if the reasons going into it change? If it's not just, for greed or for rage or stuff like that, it is for justice.
The only difference between what she's done in this movie and what Harry's done in some of the movies past is that she doesn't have a badge.
And that's what I because he specifically says during the drinks that within the law, he sees what he does as getting to the end point of what his job is. Whereas she's doing this because she just wants to do it. And I think that's where they could have had an entire arc about that.
They could have done. I don't think it's there.
No, they didn't. I am reading so much deeper into it, trying to give it the credit it wants. I fully accept that.
Because it's just that conversation and then the choice at the end. And the choice at the end's fine. And like I say, I'll compliment it in that it feels very fitting for his character to make that choice.
Right.
But I don't think, and I think part of that goes back to the problem of him like not even being involved with her enough or knowing that she's involved enough until the last little chunk. He's so disconnected from that morality, other than the fact that at one point he kind of rightly guesses, oh, I don't think this is a psychopath, I think this is someone settling a score or something. But other than that, like, it's not like he then, like, see if there was a scene where either it was with her or someone else where he goes, I don't know if I want to catch them. Like, maybe if he finds out what the crime, because that's the other thing, he doesn't know what the revenge is for either until right at the end. So like, if he knew it was for some sort of big, double gang rape that left one of them catatonic because they couldn't like mentally cope with it, like, maybe he could have a scene where he talks about it and says, oh, I don't know if I want to stop them. Like, they kind of have this coming. Like, I'm kind of on their side, and maybe wrestle with that and wrestle with the morality of being a cop, but agreeing with what the bad person, quote unquote, is doing. I think there could be something. I don't think the movie does it though.
Because I mean, if you just go back to the second movie, the villains, the actual villains, were a bunch of cops who were going and getting justice for people who dodged the system.
Yeah, but of course, and I think that's maybe where the question should be. If the second movie was like, okay, when, from Harry's perspective, when is someone crossing a line even though they have a badge? Surely the flip side of that is then, but someone who doesn't have a badge, can they get to the same line before Harry's got a problem with it?
Yeah, and I think that should have been the focus. I'm not saying that it was, but I think that should have been what the primary focus of this film was, because in the end, all it ended up being was that last scene where Harry was like, nah, I probably would have done the same thing. In fact, he did do the same thing to Mick, so...
Which is actually kind of frustrating, because we've said repeatedly about how he feels disconnected from the main plot for too much of the movie. So much of his scenes early on are just random Harry scenes for the sake of having Harry scenes. When you look at this part of it, you go, there actually is something for him to tackle that would actually be a challenge to his character, that he'd have to make this choice. And the choice he makes at the end would be a lot more impactful, sudden impactfully, you might say, it could be a central focus that would make him the central character of the movie. Or even if you do still keep Jennifer as something more of a protagonist and you let Harry be the secondary character, it could still be fundamentally in the same way that Shawshank Redemption, Andy is absolutely the protagonist and the main character, but the actual arc and redemption of the movie is not him. It's Morgan Freeman's character, Red, who's still, obviously, he's got a lot of screen time. He's still very much the second main character. But Andy's absolutely the one we're following throughout the film. And it's the other character who has the big, it's how they affect that second character. You could do that here with Jennifer and Harry, absolutely. It'd be a little different from the previous movies, but if they hit that story and arc and actually done it, that'd be great. As it is, Harry is just, he's questioning people involved. After he arrests Mick at a certain point near the end and takes him in, but the brothers of the wife of the second victim go and bail him out, and they're like his goons, so that there's 3 bad guys at the end. Basically, they try and assassinate Harry. That's the third assassination attempt. They throw him in the water. Of course, that doesn't kill Harry though. That's when Harry decides to go back to his hotel. Finds out that his friend, who came to visit him, when he came, there's just one random scene where he goes to the hotel room and there's someone waiting there for Harry, and decide to kill him instead.
It was Mick and the 2 guys.
It's Mick and the 2 guys, yeah. So they kill him. When he gets there, he sees him dead. He's like, damn it, Horace, no, another partner. I didn't even have a partner in this movie, and somehow they killed the partner.
And of course, when he went into the water, they particularly made sure that they showed he was separated from his normal 44 Magnum.
Yes. So he goes and gets his case out that we saw earlier on, which has got his new semi-auto Magnum. That's the big new weapon. I mean, obviously, yeah, it's very cinematic, because the bad guys, Mick and these two cronies, are chasing Jennifer into the amusement park at the docks, and like they've got a hold of her finally, and then they turn and they just see Harry standing there in silhouette because I'm not sure why they're keeping all these lights on at the amusement park when it's closed. It feels like a waste of electricity to me, but whatever.
I mean, I would say those are okay, just like motion sensor floodlights or something. Maybe it's just too hard to turn off or not worth.
It's not them though.
I'm fine with that. My thing with this scene is that you have to remember that this was the first one that he directed himself.
Yes.
So he had to be like, all right, I want you to make me look as badass as humanly possible.
Yep.
Because at no point in any prior movie has there ever been like a reveal moment where Harry shows up in the third act and like just wrecks shop. He's always been there leading into the third act.
No, that is so not true. The first movie on the bus, he's standing on the overpass. That is absolutely an entrance.
To be fair, that one slipped my mind. I'll give you that one.
But yeah, so he gets this big entrance. He shoots the two cronies like instantly. Again, just opens fire without a care in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to chase. They go through a carousel. Mick runs with Jennifer as he's hostage up the roller coaster.
Yeah, I do want to say that this entire scene was predicated on like an equally long scene that was just Jennifer trying to dodge them.
Yes.
Like we just had her, I believe how did it start? She was trying to kill Mick, but then they got the upper hand on her. I believe.
No. It was she was.
It was after the captain.
Yeah. She was at the captain's house with the son, and the captain's basically saying, "Hey, he did this awful thing, and I let it go kind of unpunished at the time because I didn't want people to find out my son was involved in this, and I'm sorry for that. But he couldn't live with it. He tried to kill himself. He's been left this way. Like, please don't kill him." And she does effectively make the choice not to do it. Showing that she does have a line where there is, if not forgiveness, at least But then Mick shows up with his cronies and they shoot because the captain tries to help her. The captain tries to take down Mick for her. So they get her there, but she runs away. Yeah. So there's a whole big chase sequence with just them and her through the carousel and the amusement park.
And I do want to point out on this carousel, they make sure at the end of the scene to hold on this one unicorn for like 5 full seconds. They may as well put up a title being like, "Get it? Get it? Okay, moving on."
I mean, there's not much to say, really. There's a bit of a standoff where Harry's down on the ground, they're up in like part of the roller coaster, and he says, "Make my day," and he, shoots Mick. He falls off the roller coaster, goes through the roof of where the carousel is, and lands on the unicorn, impaling himself. And then and for some reason the carousel turns on. I don't know why it turns on, but it turns on, and he starts going round.
I think she turned it on. Did she not?
Did she? I don't know. I don't remember.
Like before they left. I think they just left it on.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. If it was left on, it was left on. But yeah, that doesn't explain why all the lights are on. I'm still hung up in this.
Because who wants to go through an amusement park scene where none of the rides are actually working?
It's completely abandoned, and like it's because it's not just like there's some security lights. It's like every single
When you read a Batman comic, do you question why Amusement Mile is still on?
That's because Joker's keeping it turned on, obviously.
Okay, yeah,
easy.
They straight up said that the whole reason that she's spending her time at this carousel area is because she is restoring the carousel. So
okay. Well, actually, just before the chase through all this starts, there's the reason why she even gets away to have a chase is because he's going to rape her again under the pier. He wants to do it again with these two friends, and she's able to like kick him in the nads and makes a break
hit him in the
for
face, kick him in the nuts, and runs off.
Yeah,
for a 4-minute chase scene.
Oh, the other thing I actually want to say is I was wondering when she was going to kill Ray, I was like, oh, is she going to shoot on the crotch? Because she's done that with all the guys. And she actually did change. She shot her on the boob instead.
Yeah. She shot her in the heart because that's where her sin is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was thinking it was just a tip, but yeah, sure, okay. And it's just on the head. So it's this whole,
Yeah.
the whole thing. It's definitely the most satisfying one because the way, like, she's been such a vile character that look in her face when she realizes that she's, because her and Mick were kind of hanging out thinking, oh, she's going to show up, so we'll be together so that she can't take both of us. But because that's the thing, like, Jennifer's not this trained killer. She's just basically getting them all by surprise. That's how she's doing this. So, but yeah, that's it. Crime City, the movie, like, just the credits start rolling right after Harry's, like, let her go. Actually, the closest thing he kind of has to a partner other than Horace is there's like a young cop that he technically saved in the first robbery in town.
Yeah.
That kind of feeds him like the evidence and stuff when the captain doesn't want him there anymore. Because they give him a little desk and like one little file that's on. This is your workstation.
But he can't be Harry's partner because he's alive at the end.
That's true. So so Horace is definitely more like the actual partner.
Yep.
For sure.
So with all that said about the movie, I was just looking online and I did come across an IMDb trivia of this screenplay was originally written just to be a revenge killer flick for Sondra Locke. It didn't get any funding, and so they revised the script and turned it into a Dirty Harry sequel.
I think you can tell. I think you can tell that this was a movie that then Dirty Harry got shoehorned into.
Yeah.
And there's nothing necessarily wrong with repurposing a script into something. Like, the one that always comes to mind is there was a script called Simon Says that got turned into Die Hard 3. And, honestly, when you watch that movie, it's fine. Like, this was a great villain to, like, have John McClane go against. It works. It doesn't feel shoehorned in. But this is a weird case where this was a revenge plot where the main character still has to be there and function as the main character of the plot. So Harry does feel just tacked on to the side of it. Honestly, that is the least surprising thing that you could have told me about this movie.
It is also the highest grossing film in the franchise.
Oh, that's what. Well, that explains why the Deadpool got greenlit anyway. That's
so yeah, I mean, I like I said, like based off that trivia, I like the plot. Like the original story, the screenplay that existed prior to not getting funding.
Yeah, that's
I'm
women.
sure.
Yeah, going on revenge and like It's especially if the stuff with the captain's son was still there and it was this like, okay, this is the one she's going to choose not to kill. I think that's a kind of a poignant little thing to have towards the end, Yeah,
I mean, clearly a whole lot of it must have been changed to some extent. Like,
of course, yeah.
In order to have the first 45 minutes be Harry.
I would suspect that in the original script, the captain probably lived and like he's the one who like lets her away with it, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, possible. I honestly, I would just say the captain probably had a much larger role.
Yeah, absolutely. I would suggest that there's probably a lot of things that were more of in the town when it was just her plot.
That really is all of the killers, or not the killers, all the rapists. They all got a little bit of time at the very least. Mick and Ray more so. They
would have gotten way more. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but when it comes to the police force, I feel like that stuff was the stuff that either was tacked on with Harry or was cut down so significantly in order to give Harry the first 45 minutes. Because, like, again, Harry comes into this town and he doesn't even say one word to the police captain before the captain's like, I'm just going to tell you straight up and out, my character is, I don't like you, get out of my town.
Yeah, I'd imagine that the captain would probably... We'd probably follow a fair bit of his story, and maybe like after the second killing would be the moment he realizes who the victims are, and that'd be when he realizes, oh, this is related to my son, and maybe slowly.
And it probably would be the same sort of thing where you think the captain wants to bring the killer to justice, but in reality, he knows what's up.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Different timeline.
Yeah. It's so weird to go through a Dirty Harry movie and say, no, the vast majority of the Harry scenes feel tacked on and could be cut.
Yeah.
And even if you accept that he's there, some of them feel redundant and like there's like repeating things that like even keeping the movie as it is, you could cut out like the second assassination attempt, you could cut out the opening courtroom scene, you could cut out him getting the dog because it serves no purpose at all.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you beforehand in my notes here, I have a line that literally just reads, "The dog farts." And that is the extent of what this dog. Technically, there is a scene where the dog alerts him to like a fourth assassination attempt that we didn't even mention before.
Oh, that's right. No, you're right. There's another one at the motel or the hotel earlier on.
Who I think was the mobster who escaped from the earlier assassination attempt. I think that was that guy. So he followed him to San Paulo just to wrap up that plot.
Yeah, so we actually got a second attempt from the mob at the hotel, which Harry kills the guy. And I thought they weren't even going to mention it, which would be absurd. But the captain does bring it up. What happened at the hotel last night? And Harry doesn't answer the question. He just keeps talking about the subject he wants to talk about. And I'm like, you have to explain the dead body that you have left in the hotel, Harry.
No. You forget at the end of the third movie, the mayor gives him a free pass for life. He can do whatever he wants now.
They're not in San Francisco. It doesn't count. That's
the metropolitan area. It's fine. It's whatever. Although they did explicitly say that the jurisdiction ends at the bridge. So yeah, I guess you're right.
Oh, in the second movie they said that, yeah. Mm-hmm. That may be something they've forgotten, though.
Police extension of power. It's too much. So overall, though, technically with this film, because we haven't really mentioned that, I don't think anything really stood out. I feel like cinematography, sound effect, like nothing really jumped out at me as...
I will say it looks better than the third movie. The third movie felt like it wasn't even trying. I think this, at least in the kill scenes, at least in the first one. The first one is where I thought of Brian De Palma. I felt like I was watching a Brian De Palma. Not as good, but I felt like I was watching something mimicking that sort of dark
those were the moments
style
that I was relating to Kill Bill, where it was like every time that she came across the person for the first time, it would just zoom in on her eyes, give a quick little flashback to them doing the deed, and then back into the scene. I just imagined that. So there was some stylistic choice there. So yes, it did try more than Enforcer did, but it wasn't something that I think really stood out. Like none of the choices they made were like, wow, that was a really impressive shot or anything like that. It was
honestly,
it all came together in the editing, I feel like, more than anything.
The first like 5-10 minutes, we got to see in the car. I was thinking, oh, this seems like it might be better than the last one. It feels like it's got a strong like intent. Like I feel more from this than I did from that weird opening of the last one that was kind of like a mixed bag of like sex appeal and then like a psycho killer, but he's not a psycho killer, he's part of a militia, like, you know, like I don't know, it felt like it was more of a but as it went on, it felt obviously more bloated, it felt more strenuous with the Harry stuff. So I think overall I would say objectively it is a little bit better from just some fundamentals compared to the last movie, but it probably doesn't actually rate that much higher overall, just because all these other problems it has are just too much as well to be anything particularly special. Not to say that I didn't enjoy a scene here or there or a moment here or there, but there's just not enough.
I do want to say the first Dirty Harry film specifically left us on a very strong note.
Yeah.
And we've always wanted that, the leaving on a strong note back, and it hasn't quite got there. This movie, I feel like, left us on the weakest note out of all of them, in that it ends on this strange song that doesn't fit the tone of anything that came before it.
Although I did notice, actually, I think, I want to say it's when he's still in the city. Maybe it's just before he leaves the city, actually, and that's the point, is he's walking away, and it might be at that 45-minute mark, where the music that played at the end of at least the second movie, maybe the first and the second movie plays.
Oh, did they bring back the score?
Yeah, just a little bit of that score here. Okay. It's got a really sort of, it's a really melancholic little piece. And I sort of noticed it, and maybe that was the movie saying, hey, this is where your regular Dirty Harry movie's ending, and we're going into this other stuff now, which is an interesting choice. Honestly, I'm kind of saddened getting back and watching these again, because, like, you know, I was a bit harsher in Magnum Force than you were, and I do think it still has its sort of it's more over the top than the first one and has some problems being a sequel. But it does feel head and shoulders better than the third and the fourth movie so far.
Yeah.
So it feels like we maybe have leveled off slightly because the problems in this are different than the last movie. So maybe we've stabilized into this is the quality, but I don't know. I've got a bad feeling about the Deadpool.
Yeah.
I've got a bad feeling at this point.
I mean, this was at least a good enough idea in concept for them to bring it out of retirement. The next one is the one that kills it for good.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Now, it's possible it could be a good movie that just financially was not successful. That happens.
Entirely. But odds are.
Yeah, odds are we're not going to be thrilled next time. But I suppose we're at that point of the show where we're going to rate the movie film. So, David,
Yes.
out of 10, what are you rating?
Okay.
Dirty Harry?
So, Sudden Impact, specifically.
Or Sudden Impact. Sorry, I said Dirty Harry.
Dirty Harry, I 100% gave a 8, and I stand by that. This one, it is better than Enforcer. It is something that I sat down and I enjoyed more than Enforcer the whole way through. I think that it had, again, a better central plot. It had a better theme to it. Not that they really explored it, but it was something that at least I was paying attention to, whether they meant me to or not. So, all in all, I'd say out of 10, this one gets a... I'm going to go with 6. I was bouncing between 6 and 6.5, but I'm going to go with 6 on this just because everything that I really liked about it is things that I did a lot of reading into. It's things that I assume could be there just under the surface. It's not things that are actually presented in the film itself. It does still have just a bit more behind it than Enforcer did, but it by no means meets the previous 2 films before that in any regard. And especially, I'm giving it a 6 in terms of single movie quality. If I were to rate this on how much of a Dirty Harry film it was, it would easily be like 2 to 3 points lower because it just is not a like Dirty Harry film.
But I think you rate every movie on its own merits rather than doing like a franchise curve per se.
That's what our second rank is for.
Kind of, yeah. So I'm going to go 5.5, which is a half point higher than Enforcer because I do think it's objectively better. I think it's interesting that this has the opposite problem with its pacing and that the last movie was too short and felt like nothing really built up to anything. This movie feels too long and bloated. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of wild that they're polar opposites in that sense. I think stronger focus, which is good. I like that it does try something different. Well, no, that's the right thing for Dirty Harry. Finding out that it was a script for something else and just got Harry shoehorned into it feels very blatant. In hindsight. I could have maybe even guessed that if you'd sort of like led me down the right conversation path.
Right.
So yeah, I'll go 5.5. Definitely weaker than Magnum Force, because I will say this, a 6 to me versus a 5 and a 5.5. I think, well, obviously not in the... I still say 6 is somewhat enjoyable. There's something still enjoyable about a 6. I think once you get down to the 5 and 5.5, you're kind of in that very middle territory where you're kind of just not coming out with any net positive at the end. I'm saying 5.5 because I do think it's trying a little harder and does have a bit more merit than Enforcer did. So
I mean, to be fair, I'm giving it a 6 for the exact same reasons you are, but I gave the last one a 5.5. So
there you go. So there you go. As for the second scale that we operate on, where I asked the simple question, does it make the cut? And David here, just to reiterate this from time to time for people, maybe I should do this for every first entry in a season, but I'll do it here as well.
Figure it out.
So 5 options: a cut above, which is exceptional, amazing, no questions. Makes the cut, worth having in the collection. Whether that means the collection in general or just your collection, if you want to collect the Dirty Harry movies. Cutting it close, which is it's on the line. Cut from the collection, or cut your losses, which is jettison it into the sun and nuke it from orbit because it's the only way to be sure. Which I don't suspect you're going to go that low on this one, but
I don't know. I keep on picturing Meathead, and it's there. No, okay.
Do you know what? This is the opposite of John Wick, where you're hoping the dog's going to get it.
Oh, absolutely. I was expecting he went into the room, saw Horace dead, and then he goes into the bathroom and Meathead just slumped over. And I'm like, oh no, but now he has extra reason to care because Meathead's such an important character, right? But we don't have to talk about him ever again. And to be fair, after that Horace scene, they never do talk about him again. He is gone.
Yeah, Meathead, I feel like if he was supposed to be injured because the bad guys did something to him, I couldn't tell because he walks that way every time anyway.
Know. I had the exact same thought. I'm like, is he limping? Is he just walking? I don't... All right. Anyway, this rating. I'm really, really in between cutting it close and cutting from the collection.
Oh, and just to reiterate this, because we're still remembering this ourselves. This is a joint thing where we will settle on one between us.
We have to decide. So if I really was collecting the Dirty Harry films, and I had 1 and 2 at this point because we collectively decided 3 wasn't worth it, would I say come back and get 4? And I'm going to have to say no. I think that it's cut from the collection.
I agree. It's a cut.
Yep.
Cut it.
There's just not enough to it, especially if you're looking at it from a strictly I want Dirty Harry films. Why would you think this would be the one that would make it back?
I think the only sequel so far that's worth... I mean, I wasn't even on a... I was on a, I think I was more cutting it close on Magnum Force in my scale, but that's the only sequel I think is worth really watching. I think The Enforcer's still a Dirty Harry movie, but it's just not good enough. And then this one is just kind of murky quality wise as well, but also not really feeling like a Dirty Harry movie. So it's hard to recommend on that level. But it is, like we said, it is overall a better movie than The Enforcer, but does have other problems. So yeah, well, there you go. Cut from the collection.
Womp womp.
It's gone. All right, so there you go. That is the episode. That is Sudden Impact. Obviously, we have one final entry in the Dirty Harry franchise to go.
Oh boy.
We've done 4 movies so far. We also did the bonus episode that you get on Patreon. At the lowest tier, you can get our bonus episodes. We did The Gauntlet, which is another Clint Eastwood 70s cop movie. So we got one left, and then we're on to our next theme, which is another franchise, a smaller franchise. But we will let you know at this juncture that it is the Santa Claus. We're going to do all 3 Santa Claus movies, and then the bonus movie for Patreon to go alongside that in December is going to be another Tim Allen Christmas movie. It's Christmas with the Cranks.
Oh boy.
Oh no.
Hooray.
So that's December's festive season. And I'm telling you that now because we want to, like every other theme or franchise, let our patrons vote at the voting tier on what the next one will be. So right now, but in fact not even right now, by the time this goes up, the vote will be done already. But there was a vote in Patreon, so you have to, if you're a patron, you have to keep an eye on it on the Twitter and on the Discord and on the Patreon itself for when because the collector's cut vote, because we get a little ahead in recording, is quite far out in advance. So there was a vote in the first week or 2 of November for what will come after the Santa Claus movies. So you actually might know right now what won that. We don't, because I've not even put the vote up yet for patrons. But I'm doing that tomorrow. So I hope something cool won.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll say what the options are, even though they've already voted. But for anyone who's discovering this show later and listening to the episode, you get an idea of what the choices were. So the 3 choices are no franchises, because we want to make it clear that it's not always going to be a franchise. Sometimes it'll be themes of things. So the three options that are in the vote is a season of Tarantino movies, obviously Tarantino directed movies, a season of Jim Carrey movies, which is a follow-on from our next movie because Jim Carrey's got a small role in the Deadpool.
Itty bitty.
So that's option number 2, and then option number 3 is 70s disaster movies. So all make some sense. They'll all be a month to a month and a half long each. Some of them are big enough in terms of how many there options there are that there'll be potential volume 2s down the line. But those are the 3 options. Like I say, you'll probably know it's one already by the time you get this episode.
Yep.
But
don't spoil it for us.
I mean, we'll know as well by the time this goes up. I'll know before they do. Maybe I'll withhold it just so they get this episode, and I'll be, I know the winner. No? Okay.
I mean, go ahead and withhold it from me, just so I get to see the live reaction on screen.
But yeah, so that is a plan for some things to come. And plus, I wanted to have 3 good options because I feel like obviously Santa Claus is not like a serious franchise, you know.
Are you telling me that is not an auteur's work?
It's a tits work.
Oh.
Nah, but I have fond enough. I've never seen the sequels. I have fond enough memories of the first one as a kid, but I don't know if it's going to hold up.
I have very fond memories of the first one, but it's been so long. However, the second one I feel like played on repeat, like everywhere I went. I know every beat of that story.
Okay.
Third one never seen.
I've never seen the second or the third, so that'll be an interesting little discovery. But there you go. That's what's coming up on the show. Of course, like I said, Patreon. You can get the bonus episode every month over there, and you can, of course, get bonuses for our other shows that we have on the movie channel. Mailfuzz Movies has Screams After Midnight, the horror podcast. You can get a bonus episode and a second monthly show with that one, where me and Tim just talk about the random horror movies we watch. There's also the science fiction podcast, the Atomic Cinema Experiment that I do with Tara. Again, there's a bonus episode for that every month, and a second show every month where we just talk about what movies we've been watching. Will there ever be a second thing for Collector's Cut? I don't know. I don't know what it would be, but one day maybe. I don't know. Maybe if David has some sort of idea at some point.
It's where we sit and just talk about how Marvel killed the franchise. Just every week. Just keep doing that.
Once a month. Come on now. Not gonna be too much work. So yeah, go over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv, and if you want to support all the content and get some bonuses, that's where you can do it. You can also support us by hitting the super thanks button on YouTube, or you can do all the free stuff. If you can't give us money, that's cool too. You can comment, like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, spread us out on the Twitters at Screams Midnight for the Twitter for the channel. Of course, you can rate the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast from. Give us 5 stars and a review, and generally, just spread the word and click the buttons and watch all the content. All those things help us out a lot. So
share it with your mom.
Please do. Yes, share it with your mother. I'm tempted to crack a joke here and say something mean about everyone's mother, but I'm not. I'm not going to. I'm sure your mother's lovely.
Yes. Is that a new haircut? It looks great.
So yes, and I will just wrap up by thanking our Patreon producers for the month. Thank you to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, Board Now, Christopher Moy, David Brown, Al Treisman, and Alison M. Fordyce. They are some of our higher tiered patrons. But thank you to all of our patrons. Thank you to everyone who watches the show. We always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you see that subscribe button, or better yet, that Patreon button, go ahead, make my day.